The factory floor is deafening. Not with the sounds of chaos, but with the roar of organized, relentless industry. Metal screams against metal. Rivets punch through aluminum skin with rhythmic fury. Overhead cranes swing massive fuselage sections through the air like the bones of mechanical gods. The smell is oil, sweat, and heated steel. The light is harsh, fluorescent, unforgiving. And standing in the doorway, frozen, are 30 German prisoners of war. They wear faded gray uniforms. Their faces are gaunt, weathered by months in North African deserts or frozen Russian winters. Some are officers. Some are mechanics. All of them are soldiers. All of them have seen combat. All of them have been taught, trained, drilled into believing one unshakable truth. Women do not build weapons of war. But here, in front of them, in the heart of America, women are doing exactly that. A young blonde woman in coveralls tightens a bolt on a bomber's landing gear assembly. Her hands move with precision. No hesitation. No supervision. She doesn't look up. She doesn't need to. Beside her, an older woman with graying hair and red lipstick operates a drill press, boring perfect holes into a wing spar. Her rhythm is flawless. Her focus, absolute. Further down the line, a black woman in a polka-dot bandana welds a seam on an engine cowling. Sparks cascade around her like fireflies. She adjusts her goggles, checks the bead, and moves to the next joint without breaking stride. Above them, on scaffolding 20 feet high, 2 more women, one white, one Latina, are installing hydraulic lines into the belly of a B-24 Liberator. They call out measurements to each other. They laugh. They work. The German prisoners stare. One of them, a Luftwaffe mechanic captured in Tunisia, shakes his head slowly. His mouth opens, but no words come. Another, a tank commander from Normandy, turns to the American MP escorting them and asks in broken English, Who supervises them? The MP grins. Nobody, pal. They supervise themselves. The German doesn't understand. He looks back at the factory floor, at the hundreds of women working in perfect coordination, building bombers that will soon rain fire on his homeland, and something inside him breaks. Not his spirit. His worldview. Because this shouldn't be possible. In his world, women are mothers, nurses, clerks. They do not weld. They do not rivet. They do not build the machines that decide the fate of nations. But here they are. And the bombers they are building, they're perfect. December 7th, 1941. Pearl Harbor burns. The United States, isolated and unprepared, is suddenly thrust into a global war on 2 fronts. Europe is drowning under Nazi occupation. The Pacific is falling to Imperial Japan. And America, the arsenal of democracy, is woefully, catastrophically behind. The numbers are staggering. In 1940, the United States produces fewer than 6,000 military aircraft. Germany produces over 10,000. Japan produces 4,700. Britain, already at war, produces 15,000. America is outgunned, outbuilt, and out of time. President Franklin D. Roosevelt stands before Congress and declares a goal that seems impossible. 60,000 aircraft in 1942. 125,000 in 1943. The military brass is skeptical. Aviation experts call it fantasy. Even the aircraft manufacturers, Boeing, Douglas, Consolidated, Lockheed, aren't sure it can be done. Because building an airplane isn't like building a car. A B-17 Flying Fortress contains over 400,000 individual parts. A B-24 Liberator has 1.2 million rivets. A P-51 Mustang's engine alone requires 15,000 precision components. Every plane must be assembled by hand. Every rivet must be placed perfectly. A single mistake, one loose bolt, one misaligned spar, can kill an entire crew at 25,000 feet. And there simply aren't enough men to do the work. By 1942, 12 million American men are in uniform. Factories are hemorrhaging workers. Shipyards are desperate. Steel mills are running half-staffed. The draft is relentless. Every week, Thousands more boys leave for boot camp. Every week, the factories fall further behind. The math is brutal. To meet Roosevelt's goal, America needs to build a bomber every 63 minutes. A fighter every 4 minutes. Around the clock. 7 days a week. For 3 years straight. And the workforce? Gone. So the government does something unprecedented. Something radical. Something that will change America forever. They recruit women. Not as secretaries. Not as nurses. As riveters. Welders. Machinists. Electricians. Tool and die makers. Aircraft assemblers. The campaign is immediate and overwhelming. Posters flood every city. Rosie the Riveter flexes her bicep and declares, "We can do it." Newsreels show glamorous actresses in coveralls, demonstrating how to operate a rivet gun. Radio ads promise good wages, patriotic duty, and a chance to bring the boys home faster. And the women respond. In droves. Farm wives. College girls. Widows. Mothers. Teachers. Seamstresses. Librarians. Women who have never held a wrench. Women who have never seen a blueprint. Women who have been told their entire lives that factory work is dangerous, dirty, and unsuitable for their delicate constitutions. They flood the hiring offices. By the end of 1942, over 2 million women are working in war production. By 1943, that number doubles. By 1944, women make up 40% of all aircraft workers in the United States. They work 10-hour shifts, 12-hour shifts, 16-hour shifts during crunch time. They work nights, weekends, holidays. They work with broken fingers, sprained wrists, and bruised ribs. They work in factories so loud you can't hear yourself think. They work in the summer heat of Southern California, where the factory floors hit 110 degrees. They work in the freezing winters of Michigan, where ice forms on the fuselage frames. And they work fast. At the Douglas Aircraft Plant in Long Beach, California, a woman named Naomi Parker operates a lathe, machining propeller components to tolerances of 1/1000th of an inch. She doesn't miss. Not once. At the Boeing plant in Seattle, a woman named Sybil Lewis, one of thousands of black women hired under wartime labor shortages, rivets the wing panels of a B-17. She places 1,500 rivets per shift. Every single one is perfect. At the Consolidated Aircraft Plant in Fort Worth, Texas, a woman named Inez Sauer welds fuel tanks. The welds must be airtight. A single flaw can cause a catastrophic explosion. She knows this. She double-checks every bead, every seam, every joint. And it works. Production skyrockets. In 1942, America builds 47,836 aircraft. In 1943, 85,898. In 1944, 96,318. Over 300,000 planes in 4 years. More than Germany and Japan combined. The factories run 24 hours a day. New plants spring up overnight. Willow Run, Michigan, a Ford facility, becomes the largest single manufacturing building in the world. 1 mile long. A B-24 Liberator rolls off the line every 63 minutes. Exactly as promised. And the men fighting overseas begin to notice. They notice the bombers arriving in greater numbers. They notice the fighters escorting them are newer, faster, better armored. They notice the supply lines never falter. They notice the ammunition never runs out. They notice they are winning. But back home, something else is happening. Something the enemy cannot comprehend. Because when the German and Japanese high command receive intelligence reports about American aircraft production, when they see the numbers, the tonnage, the relentless, unstoppable output, they dismiss it as propaganda. It cannot be real. It cannot be possible. Because the reports say that women are building these planes. And in their world, that is absurd. But absurd or not, the evidence keeps mounting. In North Africa, 1943, the first German POWs are shipped back to the United States. They are combat veterans, Afrika Korps tankers, Luftwaffe pilots, infantry officers. Hard men. Professional soldiers. Men who have fought across deserts, mountains, and frozen steppes. They arrive at detention camps scattered across the American heartland: Texas, Kansas, Oklahoma, Nebraska. Remote. Isolated. Surrounded by farmland and endless sky. The camps are strange. Clean. Well-fed. Organized. The guards are polite. The barracks have heating. There is mail. There are libraries. There is a kind of civility that unsettles the prisoners, because it doesn't match the propaganda they've been fed about American brutality. But the strangest thing, the labor details. POWs, under the Geneva Convention, can be assigned to non-combat labor, agricultural work, infrastructure repair, and, controversially, industrial support. Which is how, in the summer of 1943, a group of 30 German prisoners is loaded onto a bus and driven to the Douglas aircraft plant in Tulsa, Oklahoma. They are told they will be doing basic labor: moving materials, sweeping floors, loading trucks. They are not told what they will see. The bus pulls up to the factory gate. The prisoners disembark. An American MP leads them inside. And they freeze. Because the factory floor is filled with women. Not a handful. Not a token few. Hundreds. Women operating lathes. Women assembling wing spars. Women installing engines. Women riveting fuselage panels. Women testing hydraulic systems. Women reading blueprints. Women supervising other women. The prisoners stare. One of them, Oberleutnant Hans Muller, a Luftwaffe mechanic, turns to the MP and says in careful English, "Where are the men?" The MP shrugs. "Fighting. Same as your guys." "But who trains them?" "Other women." "But who supervises?" "Foremen." "Some of 'em are women too." Muller's face goes pale. He looks back at the factory floor. A woman, no older than 25, is installing an engine mount on a bomber. She's using a torque wrench. She checks the spec sheet. She adjusts. She locks it down. She moves to the next mount. No hesitation. No supervision. No mistakes. Muller has worked on aircraft his entire adult life. He knows how precise this work must be. He knows that a loose mount can cause catastrophic engine failure. He knows that this woman, this American woman in coveralls and a headscarf, is doing work that in Germany would require a certified master mechanic. And she's doing it perfectly. Another prisoner, Feldwebel Otto Braun, a tank commander, approaches one of the assembly lines. A black woman is welding a joint on an engine cowling. The weld is clean. Professional. He watches her check the bead with a magnifying glass. She nods to herself. Moves on. Braun turns to Muller. "Das ist unmöglich." Impossible. But it isn't. The prisoners are assigned to a material handling crew. For the next 6 weeks, they work in the factory. They haul sheet metal. They move toolboxes. They sweep up metal shavings. And every day, they watch the women work. They watch them operate machinery that requires years of training. They watch them read technical manuals written in engineering shorthand. They watch them troubleshoot problems on the spot, without calling a supervisor. They watch them build bombers that will be used against Germany. And slowly, something breaks inside them. Not their loyalty. Not their courage. Their certainty. Because these women are not weak. They are not incapable. They are not the fragile, domestic creatures that Nazi ideology has taught them to expect. They are competent. More than competent. They are skilled. And the bombers they are building, they are flawless. At night, in the barracks, the prisoners argue. Some insist it's a trick. A propaganda stunt. Surely there are men hidden somewhere, doing the real work. Others are less sure. Muller writes a letter home to his wife. The censors will read it, so he is careful with his words. The factories here are unlike anything we were told. The people work with great determination. I have seen things I do not understand. I do not know if this war can be won. He does not mention the women. He doesn't need to. His wife will never receive the letter. But the sentiment spreads. In other camps, other prisoners are taken to other factories. They see the same thing. Women. Everywhere. Building ships. Building tanks. Building artillery. building the arsenal that is crushing the Third Reich. And in their reports, smuggled back to Germany through Red Cross channels, through neutral diplomats, through coded letters, the same message appears over and over. American industrial capacity is beyond comprehension. Women are performing skilled labor. Morale is high. Production is accelerating. The German High Command reads these reports and dismisses them because they cannot accept the truth that they are losing a war to a nation where women build the weapons. Her name was Rose Monroe. She was 32 years old, a widow, a mother of two. She had grown up poor in Kentucky, married young, lost her husband in a car accident, and moved to Michigan in 1942 looking for work that could feed her children. She had never touched a rivet gun in her life. But she learned. At the Willow Run bomber plant, Ford's massive B-24 production facility, Rose was hired as a riveter. She was one of 40,000 workers at Willow Run. One of 14,000 women. Her job was simple: install rivets into the fuselage panels of B-24 Liberators. Thousands of them. Every shift. Every day. The work was brutal. A rivet gun weighs 12 pounds. You hold it above your head for hours. Your arms burn. Your shoulders scream. The noise is so loud that even with earplugs, you go home with your ears ringing. The metal shavings get into your clothes, your hair, your skin. You shower and still find metal dust in your bed. And the pressure is unrelenting. Because every rivet matters. A loose rivet means a weak joint. A weak joint means structural failure. Structural failure at 25,000 feet means 10 men die screaming as their bomber breaks apart in midair. Rose knew this. Everyone knew this. So she worked with the kind of focus that only comes from understanding that lives depend on you. She placed 1,200 rivets per shift. She never missed. She never rushed. She checked every single one. Her supervisor, a man named Tom, a former Ford line manager, noticed. "You're fast," he said one day. "I'm careful," she corrected. "Same thing here." Tom recommended her for a promotional film. The government was producing short newsreels to encourage more women to join the workforce. They needed real riveters. Real women. Not actresses. Rose agreed. In the summer of 1943, a film crew arrived at Willow Run. They set up lights, positioned cameras, and filmed Rose doing what she did every day, riveting a bomber. She wore coveralls, a red polka dot bandana. No makeup, no glamour. Just a woman, doing her job, doing it well. The film was released as part of a series of recruitment shorts. It played in movie theaters across the country. Millions of people saw it. And Rose Monroe became the face of an entire movement. She didn't ask for it. She didn't want fame. She just wanted to build bombers and feed her kids. But the image stuck. A woman, strong, capable, unafraid, doing work that men said she couldn't do. And proving them wrong. Rose wasn't alone. At Boeing's Seattle plant, a woman named Sybil Lewis was making history in a different way. Sybil was black. In 1942, most defense contractors refused to hire black workers. It was legal. It was common. It was accepted. But the labor shortage was so severe that the government issued Executive Order 8802, banning racial discrimination in defense industries. Contractors resisted. Some ignored it. Others complied grudgingly, assigning black workers to janitorial jobs or segregated shifts. But some plants, desperate, pragmatic, or both, actually integrated their workforce. Boeing was one of them. Sybil walked onto the factory floor in July 1942. She was 20 years old. She had taken a welding course through a federal training program. She had scored top marks. She was assigned to the B-17 wing panel assembly line. The other workers stared. Some were curious. Some were hostile. A few walked off the line in protest. Sybil ignored them. She picked up her rivet gun. She read the blueprint. She placed her first rivet. Perfect. She placed 1,000 more that shift. By the end of the week, the complaints stopped. Not because the workers suddenly became enlightened, but because Sybil's work was flawless. And in a bomber plant, flawless work is the only currency that matters. Within 6 months, Sybil was training new workers. White workers. Male workers. Workers who, a year earlier, would have refused to take orders from a black woman. But now, they listened. Because she knew her job. And their lives, the lives of the air crews who would fly these bombers, depended on her doing it right. Sybil later recalled, "I wasn't trying to make a statement. I was trying to make a bomber. But I guess I made a statement anyway." And then there was Naomi Parker. Naomi worked at the Naval Air Station in Alameda, California. She operated a lathe, machining precision components for aircraft engines. Her story would have been lost to history, another name in a sea of millions, except for one photograph. In 1942, a photographer snapped a picture of Naomi at her lathe. She was wearing coveralls, a red polka-dot bandana. Her face was set in concentration. Her hands were steady. The photograph was never published during the war. But decades later, it resurfaced. And it became the likely inspiration for the Rosie the Riveter poster that defined an era. Naomi never sought credit. She never demanded recognition. She was in her 90s when historians finally tracked her down and told her that her image had become one of the most iconic symbols of American strength and resilience. She was bemused. "I was just doing my job," she said. But that's the point. They were all just doing their jobs. Rose, Sybil, Naomi, and millions of others. They didn't set out to change the world. They set out to survive, to feed their families, to contribute, to prove that they could. And in doing so, they shattered every assumption about what women could accomplish. They didn't do it with speeches. They did it with rivets. One at a time. Perfectly placed. Day after day. Until the bombers rolled off the line. Until the fighters took to the skies. Until the war was won. But the question remained. How did millions of women, most with no industrial experience, no technical training, no background in mechanics or engineering, learn to build the most complex machines on Earth? How did they achieve the same quality, the same precision, the same speed as the men they replaced? The answer was a revolution hiding in plain sight. It started with a woman named Lillian Gilbreth. She was an industrial engineer, a pioneer in ergonomics and time motion study, a mother of 12 children, and one of the most brilliant minds in American manufacturing. Before the war, Gilbreth had spent decades analyzing factory workflows, breaking down complex tasks into simple, repeatable steps. She believed that with proper training and proper tools, anyone could perform skilled labor. Not just men. Anyone. When the government realized it would need to train millions of women in a matter of months, they turned to Gilbreth. "Can it be done?" they asked. "Yes," she said. "But not the way you've been doing it." Traditional apprenticeships took years. A machinist might spend 5 years learning his trade. A welder, 3. A tool and die maker, even longer. There wasn't time. So Gilbreth reimagined the entire process. She broke down every job in the aircraft factory into its smallest components. She analyzed every motion, every tool, every step, and then she redesigned the training. Instead of teaching someone how to be a welder, she taught them how to weld this specific joint on this specific aircraft. Instead of teaching someone how to be a machinist, she taught them how to machine this specific part to this specific tolerance. She created jigs, custom fixtures that held parts in perfect alignment, eliminating guesswork. She created templates, pre-marked guides that showed exactly where each rivet, each bolt, each seam should go. She created color-coded systems, red for hydraulic lines, blue for electrical, yellow for fuel, so that even someone who couldn't read a blueprint could follow the system. She made complexity simple. And it worked. Training programs sprang up across the country. They were intense, fast, focused. A woman would walk into a training center having never touched a tool. 2 weeks later, she'd walk out certified to rivet aluminum airframes. 4 weeks, and she could operate a drill press. 6 weeks, and she could weld structural steel. It wasn't magic. It was systems thinking. It was industrial psychology. It was the realization that intelligence and capability are not limited by gender, only by opportunity and training. And the women proved it. At the Douglas plant in Long Beach, a quality control study found that female riveters had a lower defect rate than their male predecessors. Not equal. Lower. At Boeing, female welders passed pressure tests at a higher rate than the men they replaced. At Consolidated, female machinists met tolerance specs with greater consistency. The data was undeniable. But it wasn't just about skill. It was about something deeper. The women brought a kind of precision that came from a lifetime of fine motor work. Sewing, embroidery, knitting, cooking, childcare. These were skills the world dismissed as domestic, as unimportant, but they required steady hands, attention to detail, patience, focus, and those skills translated directly to riveting, to welding, to machining. A woman who could sew a perfect seam on a dress could weld a perfect seam on a fuel tank. A woman who could thread a needle could thread a hydraulic line through a quarter-inch gap in a bomber's fuselage. A woman who could follow a recipe could follow a blueprint. The connection was obvious, in hindsight. But in 1942, it was revolutionary. Because for the first time in industrial history, the people designing the systems, engineers like Gilbreth, weren't asking, how do we make women work like men? They were asking, how do we design systems that let women work like themselves? And the answer transformed everything. Tools were redesigned. Rivet guns were made lighter. Workstations were made adjustable. Safety equipment was tailored to fit smaller frames. Training materials were rewritten. Technical jargon was replaced with clear, simple language. Visual aids replaced text-heavy manuals. Mentorship programs were created. Experienced women were promoted to lead roles, training and supervising new hires. And slowly, the culture shifted. At first, male workers resisted. Some quit. Some sabotaged. Some refused to work alongside women. But the bombers kept rolling. And the men who stayed began to notice something. The women weren't just keeping up. They were excelling. One foreman at Willow Run later recalled, "I thought we were in trouble when the women showed up. I thought quality would drop. I thought production would slow. I was wrong on both counts." Within 6 months, the women were outperforming the men I'd lost to the draft. Not because they were stronger. Because they were smarter. They asked questions. They paid attention. They didn't showboat. They just worked. And the German POWs, scattered across camps from Texas to Michigan, watched it all with growing disbelief. They watched women operate machinery they'd been told was too complex for female minds. They watched women read technical diagrams they'd been told required male logic to understand. They watched women solve mechanical problems they'd been told required male strength to fix. And the cognitive dissonance was overwhelming. Because in their world, in the Nazi ideology they'd been raised on, women were inherently inferior. Biologically incapable of intellectual or physical labor beyond childbearing and housekeeping. But here, in front of them, women were doing the impossible. And the planes they built, they were destroying Germany. One prisoner, a Luftwaffe pilot named Lieutenant Franz Halder, later wrote in his memoir, "I could not reconcile what I saw with what I had been taught. These were not the weak, emotional creatures we had been told to expect. They were disciplined, capable, fearless." And in that moment, I understood that we had not merely underestimated America's industrial capacity. We had underestimated its people. And that miscalculation would cost us everything. By 1944, the transformation was complete. America's aircraft factories were producing at a pace the world had never seen. 96,000 planes in a single year. One bomber every 45 minutes. One fighter every 3 minutes. Around the clock. 7 days a week. And 40% of the workforce building them were women. At Willow Run, the production line stretched for over a mile. B-24 Liberators moved through the factory like a mechanical river. Wings attached. Engines mounted. Instruments installed. fuel tanks sealed, paint applied. And at the end of the line, the final station, a crew of women performed the last critical inspections. They climbed into the cockpit, checked every switch, every gauge, every control surface. They crawled into the bomb bay, inspected every hydraulic line, every electrical connection, every release mechanism. They knew that somewhere, soon, a 20-year-old pilot would climb into this cockpit. He would trust this plane with his life. He would trust the women who built it. And they would not let him down. One inspector, a woman named Margaret, later recalled, "Every time I signed off on a bomber, I imagined my brother flying it. He was in the 8th Air Force, somewhere over Germany. I didn't know if he'd ever fly one of my planes. But I knew someone's brother would. So I checked everything twice." Margaret's brother did fly a Willow Run bomber. He came home in 1945. She never told him she might have built his plane. But she knew. And that was enough. The numbers told the story. In 1943, the 8th Air Force, based in England, began its strategic bombing campaign against Germany. The plan was to cripple German industry, destroy oil refineries, obliterate transportation networks. But it was a war of attrition. German fighters were deadly. Flak was everywhere. Bombers were shot down by the dozens. Entire squadrons were wiped out in single missions. But the losses didn't matter. Because for every bomber lost, 3 more arrived. Every week, fresh B-17s and B-24s flew into English airfields. Gleaming. Perfect. Built by women in Michigan, California, Texas, Kansas. The Luftwaffe couldn't keep up. German aircraft production peaked in 1944 at around 40,000 planes. But the quality was declining. Slave labor was used. Shortcuts were taken. Sabotage was rampant. American planes, built by free women working for fair wages, were superior. Stronger airframes. Better engines. Tighter tolerances. Fewer defects. The German High Command knew it. Albert Speer, Hitler's Minister of Armaments, wrote in his diary, "The Americans are producing aircraft faster than we can destroy them. Their industrial capacity is beyond our ability to counter. We are being buried under an avalanche of machines." He didn't mention that women were building those machines. But the German POWs knew. And they told their guards, their doctors, their chaplains. And slowly, the stories filtered back to Germany. By 1945, the stories had become legend. German soldiers whispered about the American factories where women wielded tools like weapons, where production never stopped, where the machines rolled out in endless waves. Some said it was propaganda. Others knew better. In May 1945, Germany surrendered. In August, Japan followed. The war was over. And the women who had built the arsenal that won it were told to go home. Almost overnight, the factories began laying off female workers. Returning soldiers needed jobs. The economy was shifting from wartime to peacetime production. Rose Monroe, the iconic riveter, was let go from Willow Run in September 1945. Sybil Lewis was laid off from Boeing a month later. Naomi Parker left the Naval Air Station and returned to civilian life. Millions of others followed. Some went quietly. They had always known this was temporary. They had done their duty. They had proven their point. Now it was time to return to normalcy. Others were angry. They had tasted independence. They had earned their own money. They had proven they could do any job a man could do. And now they were being told to forget it all. To go back to being housewives and mothers. To pretend the last 4 years hadn't happened. But they couldn't forget. And neither could the world. Because something had changed. The myth of female incompetence had been shattered. It wasn't shattered by speeches. It wasn't shattered by protests. It was shattered by rivets. By welds. By perfectly machined components. By 300,000 flawless aircraft. The women had proven, beyond any doubt, that capability has no gender. That strength comes in many forms. That intelligence, precision, and determination are not the exclusive domain of men. And while the factories closed, while the women were sent home, while the government tried to erase the memory of what had happened. The women remembered. And so did their daughters. In the 1960s, when those daughters demanded equal pay, equal rights, equal opportunity, they pointed to their mothers. They built bombers, they said. They won a war. Don't tell us we can't do anything. And the world had no answer. Because it was true. The legacy of Rosie the Riveter wasn't just industrial. It was cultural. It was the beginning of a movement that would transform society. Not overnight. Not without resistance. But inevitably. Because once you prove that women can build the machines that change the world, you can never again claim they belong only in the home. The German POWs understood this. That's why they stared in disbelief. That's why they shook their heads. That's why they went home and told stories about the American women who built bombers. Because they knew, deep down, that they hadn't just lost a war. They had lost an argument. An argument about human potential. About strength. About the future. And America had won that argument with rivets. The war ended. The factories closed. The women went home. But history doesn't forget. By the time the last B-24 rolled off the Willow Run production line in June 1945, the plant had built 8,685 bombers. Each one assembled by hand. Each one perfect. Across the country, the numbers were staggering. 18,500 B-24 Liberators. 12,731 B-17 Flying Fortresses. 16,766 P-51 Mustangs. 40,000 P-47 Thunderbolts. And hundreds of thousands more fighters, bombers, transports, and trainers. Over 300,000 aircraft in 4 years. Enough to darken the skies over Germany. Enough to crush Japan's industrial heartland. Enough to end the war. And 40% of them were built by women. For decades, this fact was minimized. The official histories focused on generals, on pilots, on soldiers in combat. The women were mentioned, briefly, politely, as a wartime curiosity. A footnote. Rosie the Riveter became a nostalgic symbol, a vintage poster, a Halloween costume. But the women themselves, they were expected to disappear. And many did. They married. They raised children. They became the housewives the 1950s told them to be. But they never forgot. Rose Monroe never forgot. She went on to build houses, start her own construction company, and work into her 70s. When asked about her time at Willow Run, she would simply say, "I did my job. That's all." But it wasn't just a job. It was proof. Sybil Lewis never forgot. In her later years, she became an advocate for labor rights and civil rights. She spoke at schools, at museums, at veterans' events. She told her story not because she wanted fame, but because she wanted young women, especially young black women, to know. You are capable of anything. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Naomi Parker never forgot. She lived to 96. Near the end of her life, a historian found her and showed her the iconic photograph, the one that had inspired Rosie the Riveter. She looked at it for a long time. Then she smiled. "That was me," she said. "I was just doing my job." And that phrase, "just doing my job," is repeated over and over in the oral histories, the memoirs, the letters. Because to them, it was just a job. But to history, it was revolution. Today, women serve in every branch of the military. They fly fighter jets. They command warships. They lead combat units. Today, women work in every industry. They design spacecraft. They build skyscrapers. They run corporations. Today, no one seriously argues that women are incapable of technical work. Not because of laws. Not because of protests. Because of rivets. Because 75 years ago, millions of women walked onto factory floors and proved, quietly, methodically, perfectly, that they could do anything. And the world had no choice but to believe them. In 2022, the U.S. Mint issued a quarter honoring Rosie the Riveter. In 2023, the Smithsonian opened an exhibit dedicated to the women of World War II war production. In 2024, Congress passed a resolution officially recognizing the contributions of female defense workers. Too late for most of them. Rose Monroe died in 1997. Sybil Lewis died in 2001. Naomi Parker Fraley died in 2018. By the time the world decided to honor them, most of them were gone. But their work remains. Every time you see a plane in the sky, every time you walk through a factory, every time you see a woman in a hard hat, a lab coat, a pilot's uniform, you are seeing the legacy of Rosie the Riveter. Not the poster. The real women. The ones who didn't wait for permission. The ones who didn't ask if they were allowed. The ones who simply showed up, picked up a rivet gun, and got to work. And in doing so, they didn't just build bombers. They built the future. The factory floor at Willow Run is silent now. The massive assembly line, once a roaring river of aluminum and steel, is gone. The building itself has been repurposed, transformed into a museum, a monument to what once was. But if you stand in the center of that vast space, if you close your eyes and listen, you can almost hear it. The rhythmic thunder of rivet guns. The hiss of welding torches. The voices of women calling measurements, corrections, encouragement. The hum of a nation transforming itself. Because that's what this story is really about. Not just women working in factories. Not just bombers rolling off assembly lines. But transformation. The transformation of a nation that realized, in its darkest hour, that survival required letting go of old assumptions, old prejudices, old limitations. The transformation of millions of women who discovered strengths they never knew they had. The transformation of a world that would never again be able to claim that women were incapable. The German POWs who witnessed it understood something profound. They understood that America's strength wasn't just in its factories, its resources, its geography. It was in its willingness to unleash the potential of all its people. Not just half. And that willingness, that radical, unprecedented, revolutionary willingness to give women the tools and the training and the opportunity to prove themselves. That was the secret weapon. Not the B-17. Not the B-24. Not the P-51. The secret weapon was belief. Belief that capability is not limited by gender. Belief that strength comes in many forms. Belief that when you give people a chance, a real chance, they will rise to meet it. And the women did. They rose. Not with speeches. Not with demands. With work. Perfect, precise, relentless work. One rivet at a time. One bomber at a time. One life saved at a time. Until the war was won. The German POWs went home with that knowledge. Some embraced it. They told their children, their grandchildren, about the American women who built the machines that defeated the Reich. Others denied it. They claimed it was propaganda, exaggeration, myth. But the bombers didn't care what they believed. The bombers were real. The women who built them were real. And the lesson was real. Never underestimate the people you dismiss. Because the women America dismissed as too weak, too delicate, too emotional for industrial work. Those women built an arsenal that crushed two empires. Those women riveted the wings that carried freedom across the Atlantic and the Pacific. Those women welded the fuselages that sheltered young men flying into hell. Those women machined the parts that brought those men home. And when the war ended, when the factories closed, when the world tried to forget, the women remembered. And so did their daughters. And so did their granddaughters. And today, when a woman walks onto a factory floor, or into a cockpit, or onto a construction site, or into a boardroom, she carries that legacy with her. She carries the memory of Rose, who riveted bombers to feed her children. She carries the memory of Sybil, who broke the color line one perfect weld at a time. She carries the memory of Naomi, who machined precision parts and never asked for credit. She carries the memory of millions of women who simply showed up and did the work. And proved that they could. That's the lesson of Willow Run. That's the lesson of World War II. That's the lesson the German POWs learned, standing in stunned silence on a factory floor in Oklahoma. That capability has no gender. That strength is not measured in muscle alone. That the future belongs to those who unleash the potential of all their people. Not just half. Oh, and if you doubt that women can do anything men can do, if you doubt that the future is built by everyone, not just a chosen few, just look up. See that plane crossing the sky. 75 years ago, it might have been built by a woman in coveralls and a polka-dot bandana. A woman who never asked for recognition. A woman who never demanded applause. A woman who just did her job. Perfectly. Every single time. Because lives depended on it. And that's the ultimate tribute. Not monuments. Not medals. Not glory. Just the knowledge that when it mattered most, when the world was on fire and everything hung in the balance, the women showed up. They picked up their tools. And they built the future. One rivet at a time.